Well, good day to you. It is March the 4th, 2021, and I hope you're having a great day wherever you are, whenever you happen to be listening to this video. Now, you might not realize this, but March the 4th is quite a unique day on the calendar. And it's not because anything really significant happened on this day, but it is the only day on the calendar that is a command. For instance, a general would tell his soldiers to march forth. And the only reason why I know this is because I had a friend back 20 or so years ago that she told me this was her birthday and this is the only day on the calendar that's a command, and she explained why. And to this day, I still remember her birthday. So anyway, if it's your birthday today, happy birthday. And I would suggest telling this to people, and it'll help them to remember your birthday. Now, if this is your first time ever listening to Search for Signs, welcome. And if you've listened to a video or two before, welcome back. Now, my name is Gary Willing. And what we talk about here is we talk about the emergence of Maitreya and the Masters of Wisdom. Through the lost art of question and answering, we take a deeper look at who and what Maitreya is. We, of course, discuss who and what he is not. We look at why are the Masters returning now to the everyday world and what does it mean for everyone. And, of course, we tie it into the current events of the time. We look at the many miracle signs that have been going on, like crosses of light, patterns of light, lights over Jerusalem, UFO activity, crop circles, angel sightings, people being saved by angels, disappearing hitchhikers, healing waters, people cutting open fruit and the seeds spell out Allah, and so forth and so forth and so forth. Miracles abound in a world of strife and trouble, right? And the miracles are evidence of hope, and we're going to talk about that too. But anyway, the thing I want to say, and I've been starting to say this because I do think it's important, especially if this is your first time ever listening to these videos, but even if it isn't, you don't have to listen to these videos from the standpoint of religion. Now, it's suffice to say that most of the questions that come my way have to do with religion, and because they see the return of the teacher from a religious standpoint. But the teacher is not even coming back as a religious teacher. He's coming back as an educator in the broadest sense. Really more of an economic and political advisor, really. But because that's what's needed in the world, and that's what's keeping us back more than the religious aspect of it. But of course, people, like to ask questions about that, and that's fine. I don't have a problem answering questions about this in terms of religion, but you don't have to look at it like this if it's not important to you. The most important thing that we talk about on this channel is the priorities of Maitreya. And I get less questions about that than any other question. So I have to kind of talk about it in the beginning because it is the most important thing that we talk about. But what is the most important priority that Maitreya has for humanity? And this might surprise you. It's peace. We must create true and lasting peace in the world. If we don't, our very survival depends on it. Now, the teacher's path to peace is quite simple. Without sharing, there could be no justice. Without justice, there could be no peace. And without peace, there could be no future. Now, I'm going to take a look at why peace is important, and then I'm going to look at this path to peace and see if what he's saying is true. But the reason why, there's two reasons I see why peace is so important. The first is quite obvious, but I do think this is the lesser of the two scenarios, that there are a lot of nations in the world, and a lot of those nations have nuclear weapons, probably more than you and I realize, or have some kind of weapons of mass destruction on some level. Now, there are always skirmishes going on, either within a nation, or between two nations, or whatever, and at any moment, those nations could start to, battle a little bit more, and then it could create more nations to get involved, and then more and more nations to get involved, and then eventually maybe even most of the nations are involved in this battle as a potential. And if that happens, then, and there's a lot of nuclear weapons out there, one of these nations could use nuclear weapons on another nation, and it would create a chain reaction that other nations would use their nuclear weapons, and then it would create nuclear holocaust and wipe out everybody on the planet. That's a scenario. I do think that's the lesser of the two scenarios, but it is the most obvious of why peace is important. The lesser realized reason why peace is important is, I think, is a more likely scenario, and it has to do with the environment. And unless you've been living under a rock for the last 20 years, you're starting to get more and more bombarded with the danger of pollution, right? You know, there are world leaders, there are celebrities, there are, you know, figures out, people out there and groups out there and scientists out there that are sounding the alarm that if we don't do anything about this environment soon, it's going to be too late, right? And either it's going to be too late to where we can never come back from it, and then eventually we'll die, you know, it'll cause damage hundreds and hundreds of years from now, or it could be rather rapid and we could fall off the cliff rather quickly. So why is peace important to this? Well, wouldn't you agree that a handful of nations can't pull us back from the brink? It's going to have to be all the nations that do it together. Well, we have to have trust amongst the nations in order to do this. And peace is trust, and trust is peace. Now let's get back to what the teacher says about how to create peace, because you might even be some of these people that say, I don't even think that's even possible, right? The teacher puts it like this: without sharing, there could be no justice. Without justice, there could be no peace. Without peace, there could be no future. Millions of people every year march to the streets for justice. Millions of the people every year march to the streets for peace. But how many people are marching to share the resources of the world? Not very many, right? Because we're not looking at it as a necessity. But it is, and it has created peace. And I'm going to show you historically why it does. So, if you were to look at World War II, okay, or right after World War II, Europe was decimated. You know, now the United States had a choice. They could either have turned their back on Western Europe and hoped that they had gotten everything together, right? Or they could help them. And they did help them. And it was the only time the principle of sharing ever really took place. Unfortunately, it was just for a very brief amount of time. But what happened was the United States gave excesses of what they had to Western Europe to help rebuild Europe. And it did that. They rebuilt their roads, their infrastructures, their factories, their schools, their houses. And the European people were able to get back on their feet rather rapidly, and Europe pretty much rebuilt itself pretty quickly, right? The European people started to create excesses that they gave back to the United States as payment for what they initially took. It created an economic boom in the United States. That's the Marshall Plan. When you look at it, or if you ever do take the time to go to Wikipedia and read about it or whatever, or there might be some websites that talk about it, that's basically what they're going to be talking about, is who started it, how long it lasted, and what the process was. But what they don't realize, and most historians, if not all the historians, don't talk about it like this, it created peace. The United States and those nations that participated in the principle of sharing have a more peaceful, trusting relationship than any other nations on the planet, even 70 or so years after that stopped. And, you know, Germany doesn't try to attack France. France hasn't looked at attacking, you know, England and so forth. Even within those nations, they don't fight amongst each other, right? So it has helped. And so if we were to do this globally, it could create goodwill amongst nations globally. And then we could tackle something like the environment rather rapidly. It would end hunger, so that's a good thing. It would bring about justice, because an injustice somewhere is an injustice everywhere, really. But the people of the nations would start to feel that their life is fulfilled, that they have food maybe, or clothing, and, you know, okay, everything's going to be good, right? And that would bring about justice. So I think historically it's going to do exactly, or, you know, in the future it's going to do exactly what it did right after World War II, but it could eventually be done, you know, globally. That's what these masters are talking about doing through the principle of sharing. Now we get into the questions, and most of these questions are religious. So anyway, and if you have a question, even if it's religious, I don't care. Post your question as a comment, and we'll look at it and we'll talk about it, and it'll help us to understand this information better, okay? So thank you very much. Now, if you're somebody who doesn't like to ask questions, of course, within the description of each video are links that you can look at and you can go to, and you can do your own research and come to the truth of this for yourself or not, okay? So anyway, now the person who asked the most questions, Robert, I do need to tell you, I'm not going to be able to answer all your questions because I do want to get to some other people's questions in this, if that's okay with you. You did ask some good questions. Most of them were good questions and one silly question, and I'm going to answer the silly question first. Is it possible that Trump is Maitreya? That's the silly question. Of course you know that, Robert. Why would you even ask that question? But no, of course not. He's not Maitreya. First of all, Maitreya, when you see him out on TV and you recognize him, he's not going to align himself with any government or political party or religious group or any group. He's going to be a man of the people. So that's one thing. That's one tell that he's not Trump, because Trump was the president of the United States. He's not going to hold any specific office, just like Jesus didn't. Jesus wasn't a king or a priest or anything like this. He was just a person, right? He was a teacher, and that's what Maitreya is just a teacher. But he's a teacher in the broadest sense. And even though he's speaking on TV, he's not claiming to be the Christ or anything like this. You might see him on TV and recognize him as the return of your awaited teacher, or you might not. You know what I mean? You might just see him as a teacher, or you might not even recognize him as a teacher. I don't know. But anyway, so no, he's not Maitreya. Now, if you ask Maitreya, and it pains me to say this, but I'll be honest, is Trump divine? Maitreya will say, yes, of course. If you ask Maitreya, it pains me to say this, is the Christ principle within the heart of Donald J. Trump, the former president of the United States, too? Is it in his heart too? He'll say, oh yes, it's in there too, right? Even though it might be a very, very dim spark and look like a far off distant star, it's in there, right? And then if you said, is he eventually going to manifest his divinity perfectly like all the other masters, like all the masters in the world? And he'll say, oh yes, Donald J. Trump will eventually be a master too, and he will be manifesting his soul quality perfectly, right? Yes, he will say it like that. And he'll probably have some wonderful things to say about Donald J. Trump. But, he sees him for who he is too. But, Maitreya said to me one time, he goes, I never judge anyone on whether they're good or bad. I only notice the good things that they do. That's what he told me. So I guess it applies to Trump too. Now, your next word you used, you said QAnon hints at it. Brother James Key is a YouTuber who claims Trump is the Antichrist. Perhaps by Antichrist, he really means Maitreya. Okay, so I always hesitate to use the word QAnon in my videos because the algorithm of, of YouTube seemed to flag it, right? Now, here recently, I haven't used the word QAnon in any of my videos. I haven't talked about any right-wing conspiracy theories, but yet they've been flagging my videos for QAnon. So I guess I can say it as much as I want, right? Doesn't matter, right? QAnon, 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 QAnon. There you go. So I said it, 6 times? I don't know who Brother James Key is. I don't really care. I don't listen to QAnon videos. I don't believe anything that they say. That's just me. You can believe it if you want. I know, Robert, I know you know this because we talk about it, but I don't mind bringing it up again. The Antichrist is an energy. And Revelation, the book that John wrote in the Bible, was meant to be interpreted over a longer period of time than just a few years. But because we as people look at life very limitedly and very selfishly, we relate everything back to ourselves. And we think that the end times are, because maybe perhaps life is difficult for us, or we see life as difficult for the world for the most part, we try to relate it back to Revelation, and we look at any kind of proof or evidence that we can find for ourselves to prove to ourselves that we're living during the end times. Now, we're not unique in this. People thought that the world was going to end in the year 1000, and that was the end times. And that's what Revelation was talking about. But did it? No, of course not. So the end times keep getting pushed back, and the goalposts keep getting pushed back and pushed back and pushed back and pushed back and pushed back. I mean, it's just what we do, right? The Antichrist that John was talking about was an energy. It was released during the time of Nero to destroy the old ways of thinking and relating, just like it did through the Axis powers 80 years ago, or so 75 years ago, 80 years ago, to create a new way of thinking and relating to occur. If you look historically, not long after Nero destroyed the Roman dispensation, because the Antichrist energy, he was the one that was playing the fiddle. I don't even know if the fiddle was invented at that time, but he was playing the fiddle while Rome burned. But anyway, it allowed Christendom to flourish, right? Now, the qualities of the age of Pisces have done their work, and now we're moving into a new age where it has new qualities. So the energies of the Antichrist destroyed, not totally yet, but they've done some of their work, and it destroyed the old ways of thinking to allow the new qualities of Aquarius to have an effect on humanity in a positive way. I think if the Antichrist energy wasn't sent out through, and this is just my guess, but through the Axis powers, the turbulence that it's taking to go from the age of Pisces to the age of Aquarius, because there's such diametrically opposed qualities, the turbulence and the turmoil that it would take, that we're going through now, would be longer and more drawn out, right? Now, you had mentioned something about Benjamin Creme saying that the Antichrist energy should be even welcomed or something. I don't even know. It doesn't matter, because I've never read that. I never heard it. I've read his books hundreds of times. I've watched his videos over and over again. I've met him in person. I've seen him in person. I've seen his lectures firsthand. I've never once heard him say that. I watched the Art Bell interviews or listened to the Art Bell interviews. Never heard him say this, but it doesn't really matter. The Antichrist energy has a purpose, but to me, it's a lot like swimming with a great white shark. I mean, a great white shark has a purpose too. It keeps the balance. It's a predator in the ocean. It keeps the balance in the ocean and so forth. But I'm not going to go swimming up and try to pet it, right? We're going to let it do its thing on its own. It's the same thing with that Antichrist. I'm just going to let it do its thing on its own. I don't want it around me. And I sure as hell don't want to live through it, because it's nasty. But it does serve a purpose, right? It is what it is. But the other thing, too, is that when Christians look at the Revelation, they automatically assume that it's a shorter period of time because they have a very limited time frame of which they look at life, right? But there's some truth to them looking for the Antichrist, because they're innately realizing, because Maitreya's coming closer and closer to humanity every day, they're picking up on it too, just like I did in my own way, that the Christ is coming back, or the Christ is back. You know what I'm saying? But it's just distorted, and they're thinking that he's about to come back when he's actually already returned. He came like a thief in the night, like an hour when you least expect it. That's how he did it. Now, if I was a fundamentalist Christian who was scouring the internet looking for the Antichrist, I would say Trump would be at the top of my list. Most people, and I talk about this in every video, we say we always discuss a little bit about who and what Maitreya is, and we talk about who and what he is not, right? And he's not the Antichrist, but most people who view Maitreya as the Antichrist have never even seen him. They've never experienced his love or his wisdom. They've never even heard his words firsthand. They're just going off of what Benjamin Creme said, that he's the Christ. Oh my God, he must be the Antichrist. Have you even seen him? You know what I'm saying? You might have seen him on TV, but he's not presenting himself as anything but an ordinary person. So how would you know? I would say it would be better to wait. But like I said, I would say Trump would probably be at the top of my list. But Trump's not even the Antichrist, so I wouldn't worry about it. But anyway, the next question you had, and I'll try to answer these a little bit more quickly. Do the gods of the world's religions have a real existence? Does Maitreya communicate with them? For example, is Jehovah, the God of the Hebrew Bible, a real person? Well, no. Didn't we answer this question? I thought I answered this question for you before, but anyway, maybe I didn't. And does Maitreya communicate with him? No, Jehovah was a symbol for God, but there is no Jehovah God that's a bearded man sitting on the clouds, judging humanity and so forth. There's no truth to that. Jesus Christ was a real person. He's a master now. He's one of the closest masters to Maitreya, of course. He's a very, very advanced master who will be known for who he is too, not long after Maitreya introduces himself to humanity, or declares himself to humanity. Maitreya worked through him through the process of overshadowing. So Maitreya was living in the Himalayas. Jesus was in Palestine. Maitreya overshadowed him, and so the teachings of teachings of Jesus are actually the teachings of Maitreya, really. And same thing with the Buddha. The Buddha worked through the Prince Gautama in the exact same way. So the teachings of the Prince Gautama are really coming from the Buddha, who's the other planetary Christ. So we have two, Maitreya and the Buddha. And then in terms of the ancient Egyptian gods and even the gods of Greece and Rome, maybe the Norse gods, I guess. I don't know. But I know those, for instance. They're just myths, right? But there is a germ of truth to them, meaning that they started out as stories about the work and activity of the masters during the time of Atlantis. And then through eons of the masters not being around and nothing being written down, and it was just going from, this person to that person and that kind of thing. It eventually became folklore, which eventually became myths, and now is so distorted there's not hardly any truth to it. But the germ of truth about the gods of those were probably the work and activity of the masters during the time of Atlantis, but not really enough to really say there's any truth to it now. All right. Let's see. And then the last one I'm going to talk about, and then we can look at some of the other questions in the next video. Could I telepathically communicate with Maitreya by meditating or hypnotizing myself into a higher state of consciousness where our thoughts could connect? No. Now, why would you even do that? You don't have to do that. If you look at the description of this video, okay, and you click on the link to Share International, okay, they have a page about the Hand of Maitreya. Now, what is that? The Hand of Maitreya is actually one of the many miracle signs that have happened over the decades, and it's quite an extraordinary miracle. It was a handprint of Maitreya that appeared on a bathroom mirror in Barcelona, Spain. Maitreya himself even says that if you look at that imprint, it creates a mind-to-mind contact with him where it is the closest any one of us can get until he's out known for who he is. And then let's say I'm in Atlanta or you're wherever you are, Robert, and Maitreya comes to your town and you see that he's coming into your town because there's an advertisement for it, and you hear him talk, and then after he's talking, he's walking amongst the crowd, and you're able to traverse through the thousands of people that are there to see him, and then you eventually get close to him and you shake his hand and maybe even whisper something in his ear. This is the closest you can be to him until that time. Okay, so you don't even have to wait for him to be out known for who he is in the world. You can actually just look at the Hand of Maitreya and ask for his help or something like this. Now, the beautiful thing about this miracle, and Benjamin Creme talks about it on the Share International website, is you don't even have to go to Barcelona, Spain to reap its benefits. You can actually just download a PDF or see a picture of it or take a screenshot of it. That's it. So you don't have to go through this whole process of meditating and hypnotizing, which isn't going to get you there anyway, but it's just because you have to be very, very, very advanced as a disciple to even, and be trained for a long time to even get to the point where you can communicate with Maitreya in that way. So even Benjamin Creme, who was evolved enough to be able to be overshadowed by Maitreya or a master, it took him working day and night, 20 hours a day sometimes for decades to get to the point where he could do it the way that he could do it. So Jesus was the same way. It's said in the Ageless Wisdom teachings that the process of Maitreya working through Jesus telepathically started when he was 13 and was completed in his 30s, right at the time of the baptism. That was the symbol of the dove flying overhead as John baptized him in the water. That was a symbol of Maitreya completing the work with him and then being able to work through him fully and completely. So, A, you'd have to be evolved enough to do it, and then B, you would have to go through decades of training to get there. But now he's not going to overshadow you this way, but you can ask for his help through the Hand of Maitreya. You can ask for a healing or something like this. And I've mentioned this before. I've used the hand quite a bit, and I've seen specific help come my way by asking help from Maitreya through the hand. For instance, when I first started this channel a couple years ago, I started talking about my experiences that I had with Maitreya. And there's this one experience that I had that didn't happen to me really, but it was for me, but it didn't happen in front of me. I didn't see Maitreya, somebody else did, okay? He helped me, I was cleaning a building, and he helped me with the trash in this building is really what happened. And if you're interested in hearing more about this, just go to my playlists, and I have my Maitreya experiences in there, and you can listen to this. Because I think it's quite an extraordinary experience that I had with Maitreya. But anyway, I asked Maitreya for help. He came and helped me, but I didn't see him. Somebody else at the building saw him. And anyway, so to make a long story short, I wanted to talk about this story on this channel. I could not remember this woman's name to save my life. It was driving me crazy. And I wanted to use her name. I didn't want to just say some lady saw him, right? So I looked at the Hand of Maitreya one night, and then I said, Maitreya, if you can you help me remember who this person was? Because I want to record this video. I was thinking that a thought would come my way, like, oh, it's her name. Oh, okay. But what happened was, and this is what's quite extraordinary, I was in a different part of town than where where this lady worked. I hadn't seen her in years. And she comes waltzing right into my job one night. And I was like, oh my God, you used to work at the DOT where I used to clean. She goes, yeah. And she had no idea why I was so excited. But I was excited because I just asked the Hand of Maitreya to help me remember her name. I said, what is your name? And she goes, it's Carol. I was like, oh my God, I can't believe it. And so I'm sure she was looking at me like, why is this guy so excited to see me? He was cleaning the building I worked at. But I was blown away I had asked Maitreya for help through the Hand. And it came back the next day as she came waltzing into the place that I work. So anyway, and I asked her name, and then the next day I recorded the video, and the rest is history. So, I've asked Maitreya for help with raising my daughter, and I've seen it come my way, and help with coworkers, help with my job, financial help from time to time. It's come specifically. You have to be specific. That's according to Benjamin Creme. He always says, be specific when asking the Hand for help. Robert, you're a very specific person, so that will come easy for you, but it might not come easy for other people. And then, a lot of times he helps you and you don't realize he helped you, but sometimes it can be very dramatic, like what happened to me. So anyway, hopefully that helps. But yeah, man, you don't have to do all that stuff. Don't worry. When people talk about channeling Maitreya and stuff, that's just a bunch of hogwash. The ability to be able to work telepathically with any one of these masters, let alone Maitreya, it takes years and lifetimes to get to that point. And then once you're even at that point, like I said, it takes years of work to even get to it. You can't just roll out of bed and have it happen. And that's why I take no credence to when somebody says that they are channeling any one of these masters or the ascended masters, because I already know that they didn't put any work into it. If you had known Benjamin Creme, he talked about how hard he had to work to get to that point, day and night for a long time to get it to where he could work with his master, let alone Maitreya. So anyway, but yeah, hypnotizing and all that kind of stuff's not going to help. So anyway, the masters don't work with those of us, which the majority of us find ourselves like this, who are what are called astrally polarized. You have to hold your attention at a very, very high rate, very, very high. And so hopefully that helps. All right. Now, the next series of questions come from I Am David. And I found your question very interesting, and I wanted to read it. So I know you started to kind of answer your own question, but I want to talk about this. So I found this webpage post entitled Lord Maitreya posted June 2009, links below. And I read the link and I read the article. So, David, I read it. Anyway, so the first paragraph caught my attention. A man claiming to be Lord Maitreya presented his credentials as the Messiah before 200 media representatives and world leaders at an April 21st to 22nd conference in London. According to the Tower Center of Los Angeles. Wow, really? So I did a search for London conferences April 2009. And of course, the G20 summit took place in April 2009. With world leaders. The dates don't match, as the G20 summit was on the 1st and 2nd of April. But the post did mention that world leaders were at the conference. Could there have been any other conferences in London a few weeks after G20? I don't know. I am having a difficult time trying to piece this together. I can't find website for Tower Center of Los Angeles, which, if I'm reading correctly, was something to do with Share International, and a spokeswoman named Lynn Craft. My question is simple, this Gary. Have you come across this claim as stated in the webpage, and or are you able to add or at least comment on the report? Peace be with you as always, David. Well, peace back to you, David. What you put out, you get back. So I'm sending that back your way too. And then you went and read some of the other things, some of the other posts too. And I think you were kind of answering your question. And then I loved your last one. Oh, okay, so I'll stop now and let you respond. Eek. Yes, I knew about this, but I only knew about this from reading Benjamin Creme's book, Maitreya's Mission, Volume 2, back in the early 90s. Now, a couple things. When I went and read this, interview on this website, equip.org, they took the announcement that Benjamin Creme made that Maitreya was on TV, and they took information that was actually posted in his book or in Share International magazine too, 30 some odd years ago in the late 80s, and they meshed it together and it made it sound like it all happened in 2009. But the interview happened in late 2009, 2010. I don't know, when Maitreya first did his interview, but that conference per se was in the late 80s. Maitreya had been, I don't know if he still is or not, but he was living in the Asian community of London, and he was apparently living in several of the temples in London. Now, Benjamin Creme made an announcement in 1982 that if any media representative of some kind of reputation, or ideally a group of media like journalists or something, went into the Asian community of London to just seek Maitreya out, that Maitreya would find him out and they would start the whole process of Maitreya's emergence a lot quicker if they did that. And not one of them did it. They were interested in the story, according to Benjamin Creme, but they weren't interested enough to actually take the steps to go into London and do it. But Maitreya was in there. People in the Asian community were already starting to suspect that he was the Imam Mahdi because they were mainly Muslim or a teacher or something like this. And that Maitreya had been giving lectures through this time by invitation only at one or other of these temples in the Asian community of London for over a decade. A lot of people came. Now, this particular conference that Benjamin Creme talked about in his book, Maitreya's Mission, Volume 2, happened, I think, in either 88 or 89. Okay, I'm thinking, okay? And in April of that time. And Maitreya did indeed invite several hundred well-known world leaders to come to London and kind of get to know him, Incidentally, and this is kind of sad, but this is true, is Maitreya has some assistants or swamis working with him, and they know who he is. They know he is the one awaited by all the world's religions. They know how important it is for him to come out on TV and so forth. And Maitreya asked them to help him write the invitations. And they all said yes, and not one of them did. And Maitreya had to write his own invitations for this conference, right? I mean, it's sad, right? But it shows how the inertia of humanity, really. And these, like I said, these swamis know who he is, and he did do exactly what that article said, where he presented his credentials, disappeared, reappeared, that kind of thing. Anyway, what was I going to say? So he asked all the participants not to mention anything about this until after he has declared himself as Maitreya before the world on the day of declaration. There was one in particular that Benjamin Creme was able to mention because he had passed away, and that was the former King Hussein of Jordan. There's a King Hussein of Jordan now, but his father, who was the king of Jordan then, went to this conference to meet Maitreya. And there was some time that they spent alone. Maitreya actually asked him personally if he would give up some of his land to the Palestinians who didn't have a homeland. The King Hussein of Jordan did agree to do this, and they were trying to work it out, and the Israelis came and took that land anyway. So it's just quite an unjust situation that's going on in that area. But anyway, that was the only one he was able to speak of. But eventually, once Maitreya is out known for who he is, these participants will start to say, yes, I was there. And like he said, there was actually some of the royal family was there and so forth. But that's pretty much all I can say. And I when I was reading the article, it's funny. There's a couple things. One, I knew the time frame was off because Tara Center hasn't been around for probably 25 years. They were the original group in Los Angeles that put out the Share International magazines and some of the books. And then as the United States got really big, Benjamin Creme's master suggested that they try to decentralize the group, which they're still not decentralized, but they tried. And they reincorporated under Sharon International. So that's why you're not going to find a website for Tower Center. And then Lynn Craft, who I've known Lynn for, wow, over 25 years. Wonderful lady. She hasn't gone by the name Craft since, before I met her, actually. I've always known her as Lynn Girdlestone. So anyway, when I read it, I started laughing. I was like, yeah, they just kind of meshed all this together to try to make it sound like it's happening now, but it's not. It's kind of just like with Revelation, it's over a longer time period than they're giving it credit. So anyway, thanks for the question, David, and thanks for the piece to me. So a piece back to you. But thank you again, guys, and I look forward to more questions in the future. And Robert, I'll try to answer some of your questions in the next video. All right, take care. Remember to take action and help SOP save our planet. Thanks for listening, and we look forward to talking to you again in future videos.